Hello and welcome to Cognitive Drift. The emotional appeal of faith isn't hard to understand. Most people don't find religion by carefully evaluating arguments and weighing evidence. They find it when life becomes too much, when they're scared, when they feel small in a world that's too big. Faith steps in where logic doesn't offer much comfort. At its core, religion offers something extremely powerful: relief. It gives people a sense that they're not alone, that someone is watching, guiding, protecting, that even when life feels senseless, there's a hidden plan behind it all. That's not something you calculate, that's something you feel. When you lose someone you love, it's unbearable to think they're simply gone. So religion tells you they're not, that you'll see them again. That's a deeply comforting story. And it works, not because it's proven, but because it speaks directly to our grief. We're wired to seek patterns, to search for causes behind every event. Randomness makes us uneasy, so when something terrible happens, we instinctively look for meaning. Religion fills that space, easily. It tells us that everything happens for a reason, even if we can't understand it now. The promise of justice is another hook. In this world, bad people often go unpunished. Good people suffer for no reason. That's hard to accept. But if there's a God watching, keeping score, promising that justice will be served eventually, maybe not in this life, but in the next, then the world feels a little less cruel. It's not surprising that so many religious traditions place a strong emphasis on reward and punishment after death. Heaven for the good, hell for the wicked. It's simple, it's satisfying, and most of all, it gives people hope that fairness will ultimately prevail. Faith also offers belonging. Humans are social creatures. Being part of a religious community means having people who support you, who share your beliefs, who validate your experiences. That sense of belonging can be incredibly powerful. The rituals, the shared language, the collective identity, they bind people together. In times of crisis, those bonds feel even stronger. People rally around each other, pray together, grieve together. Religion provides a structure for dealing with life's hardest moments. It gives people something to hold on to when everything else feels unstable. There's also the comfort of certainty. The world is complicated. Science offers answers, but often they're complex, provisional, and sometimes unsettling. Religion offers simple answers, clear rules, moral clarity. That's very appealing when you're overwhelmed by uncertainty. The emotional pull of faith isn't limited to personal struggles. It extends to the bigger questions too. Why are we here? What's the point of existence? Is there any meaning at all? Religion gives confident answers to those questions. It tells a story where every person matters, where life has purpose, where everything fits into a grand design. That narrative is deeply attractive because it relieves existential anxiety. The idea that life might just be a brief accident of biology, that there's no cosmic meaning, that can be hard to swallow. Faith steps in and fills that void. And for many people, questioning these beliefs feels dangerous. If you let go of faith, what's left? The fear of nothingness is strong. The fear that life might not have inherent meaning, that death is final, that there's no one listening. These are heavy thoughts. Religion shields people from them. Even childhood plays a role. Most people are introduced to religion very early, long before they're able to critically evaluate any of it. The beliefs become part of their identity, their emotional world, their sense of reality. Letting go of faith later often feels like tearing out a part of themselves. That's why even brilliant, well-educated people can hold on to beliefs that on the surface seem irrational. Because it's not really about logic, it's about the emotional framework that faith provides. The comfort, the security, the belonging, the meaning. These are not small things. Throughout history, religious leaders have understood this intuitively. They rarely win converts by offering evidence. They win them by offering comfort, by addressing pain, fear, and uncertainty, by promising hope. Even the structure of religious rituals is designed to create powerful emotional experiences. The music, the chanting, the group prayers, the architecture of sacred spaces, all carefully crafted to stir deep feelings. That emotional intensity reinforces belief. It creates moments that feel profound, even transcendent. And when people experience those feelings, they often interpret them as evidence that their beliefs are true. I felt God's presence, they'll say. But intense emotions aren't proof. They're just emotions. Yet they feel convincing. Sometimes people say that faith gives them peace. And for many it does. But that peace comes at a cost. It requires embracing stories that may not stand up to scrutiny. It means accepting explanations that sidestep the hard questions. It means placing emotional comfort above intellectual honesty. That's not an attack on individuals. It's an observation about how our minds work. We all want to feel safe, loved, and significant. Faith offers all of that in a neatly packaged story. That's why it persists, not because the evidence is strong, but because the emotional rewards are. In a way, religion functions like a psychological safety net. When reality feels too harsh, it softens the fall. When the world feels chaotic, it offers order. When life feels empty, it offers meaning. It's not surprising that people cling to it, especially in times of crisis. This doesn't mean people are foolish for believing. It means they're human, vulnerable to the same emotional needs we all have. The difference is in how we respond to those needs. Some find comfort in faith. Others seek comfort in different ways. The emotional appeal of faith is powerful precisely because it offers answers to the questions that hurt the most. What happens when I die? Why do bad things happen? Is there any meaning to my life? Religion has ready-made answers to all of these, and they feel good. But feeling good doesn't make something true. The truth isn't always comforting. Sometimes it's harsh, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it offers no consolation at all. That's part of what makes truth-seeking difficult. The willingness to face uncomfortable realities is not easy. If someone tells you that your suffering has a reason, that your lost loved one is waiting for you, that there's a perfect plan guiding your life, it's tempting to believe them, because it soothes the ache. But soothing the ache and solving the problem are not the same thing. We tend to overestimate how much our emotions can tell us about reality. Just because a belief feels right doesn't mean it's right. We see this in countless areas of life, not just religion. Our emotions are valuable, but they're not reliable detectors of truth. The emotional architecture of faith is carefully built to protect itself. It offers not only comfort, but also reassurance when doubts arise. Have faith, people say. Trust God's plan. Doubt is reframed as a test, as something to overcome rather than something to explore. This makes faith incredibly resilient. Criticism often bounces off because the emotional defense mechanisms are so strong, and stepping away from that comfort is deeply unsettling. It means facing fears that faith was shielding you from. For those who've left religion, this process can feel like grieving. You're not just letting go of beliefs, you're letting go of comfort, community, certainty. It's painful, but it can also lead to a different kind of peace. One that's not built on comforting stories, but on accepting uncertainty. The emotional appeal of faith taps into some of our most basic human needs: safety, belonging, purpose, hope. That's why it remains so compelling, even in a world overflowing with information and evidence to the contrary. Because it speaks to the heart, not the mind. And as long as humans crave comfort more than truth, religion will always have an audience. Not because it has the best answers, but because it offers the answers people most want to hear. That's the power of the emotional appeal of faith. There's another layer to all this that often gets overlooked. The way faith simplifies complexity. Life is messy. The world is full of contradictions, unfairness, and situations that don't have easy explanations. Religion trims all of that into a narrative where everything fits neatly into place. Good versus evil, sin and redemption, suffering with a purpose. This simplicity is part of its emotional pull. It reduces anxiety by cutting through the chaos. It tells people what is right and what is wrong, who belongs and who doesn't, what happens now and what happens after death. No long debates, no uncertain probabilities, just certainty. Certainty is deeply calming. The unknown is uncomfortable. To say I don't know leaves a vacuum. Religion fills that vacuum instantly. That's why it often resists open-ended inquiry. Questions are welcome only if they lead back to the same answers. The emotional security depends on keeping those answers intact. Even the language of faith is designed to evoke emotion more than reflection. Words like grace, blessing, divine will, they carry a kind of emotional warmth. They sound beautiful, comforting, hopeful. They're designed to soothe rather than challenge. They bypass the critical mind and go straight to the emotional core. And when people grow up hearing these words from trusted figures, parents, teachers, religious leaders, the association becomes even stronger. Comfort and faith become intertwined from a very young age. It's not just a set of beliefs. It becomes a place people retreat to when life gets hard. That's why arguments based purely on evidence often fail to move believers. It's not that they can't understand the arguments, it's that the arguments don't offer the same emotional security. Letting go of faith isn't just about changing your mind. It's about losing an entire emotional support system. Think about how people react when a tragedy strikes, a natural disaster, a sudden illness, an unexpected death. In those moments, many turn to prayer, not because it's proven to be effective, but because it offers the feeling that someone is listening, that their pain matters to a higher power, that the chaos is being watched by something greater than themselves. That feeling is incredibly hard to let go of, especially when you've experienced it in your most vulnerable moments. The comfort becomes its own kind of evidence. I felt it, therefore it must be real. But of course, feelings can mislead us. They're powerful, but they're not proof. Even hope itself plays a major role. Hope that there's something beyond death, that good will ultimately triumph, that suffering has meaning. These hopes aren't irrational in themselves. They're deeply human. But when hope substitutes for evidence, it can lead people to hold tightly to beliefs that don't withstand scrutiny. Religious hope is especially potent because it offers ultimate rewards, not just comfort in this life but in the next, eternal life, reunion with lost loved ones, forgiveness, paradise. The stakes couldn't be higher. No philosophy class or scientific paper can compete emotionally with that kind of promise. This is why faith often resists doubt so fiercely. Doubt feels dangerous because it threatens to take away these hopes. It's not just an intellectual shift, it's an emotional risk. That's why people will sometimes cling even tighter when confronted with evidence against their beliefs. The loss feels too great. We also need to consider how faith leverages fear. Not just hope, fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, fear of punishment, fear of being separated from loved ones forever. These fears run deep, and religion addresses them directly. Believe and you'll be saved. Doubt and you risk eternal separation. These aren't just abstract ideas. They're intensely personal. The fear of hell, for example, isn't just theological. For many, it's an emotional threat they carry for years, sometimes for life. Even people who intellectually leave religion often describe how difficult it is to fully let go of that fear. The emotional residue lingers, and fear works hand in hand with community pressure. In many religious settings, doubt isn't just a personal matter. It's seen as betrayal, as disloyalty. Losing your faith might mean losing your social circle, your family's respect, your place in the community. The emotional cost can be enormous. This is part of why faith systems often isolate their followers from opposing viewpoints, not necessarily by force, but by framing outsiders as dangerous. Don't read that. Don't talk to them, they'll lead you astray. It protects the emotional bubble, because once cracks form, they can spread quickly. But let's not overlook something else. The emotional appeal of faith isn't only about avoiding pain, it's also about experiencing joy, wonder, awe. Many people describe their religious experiences as deeply beautiful, transcendent moments that feel bigger than themselves. Singing together, praying together, feeling connected to something greater. These moments are real, emotionally, but they don't necessarily tell us anything about the truth of the beliefs behind them. Human beings can feel transcendence in all kinds of contexts: music, art, nature, even secular gatherings. The emotional experience is valid, but it isn't evidence. Still, the beauty of those experiences makes faith harder to question. People don't just fear losing the comfort, they fear losing the joy, the wonder, the meaning that religion has given them. The emotional investment is enormous. Even the rituals serve this purpose: lighting candles, chanting, fasting, pilgrimages. They aren't random. They structure emotions, create a sense of sacred time and space, and reinforce belonging. Participating in them strengthens emotional attachment to the faith itself. When we look at faith this way, as an emotional structure rather than a purely intellectual one, it becomes easier to see why logical arguments often fall flat. The debate isn't just happening in the mind, it's happening in the heart, and in the community, and in the personal history of each believer. In many ways, the emotional appeal of faith works because it makes life feel less fragile, less random, less meaningless. It offers certainty where there is none. It turns chaos into order, death into transition, suffering into growth. It's emotionally elegant, even if intellectually fragile. And that's where the tension lies. Because the harder you look for truth, the more you're forced to live with uncertainty, with ambiguity, with limits to what we know. Science doesn't promise perfect justice. It doesn't promise eternal life. It doesn't offer cosmic comfort. That's why it feels emotionally cold to many. But truth doesn't owe us comfort. Reality simply is, whether or not we like it. Facing that can be painful, which is precisely why faith, with all its emotional rewards, continues to thrive. There's something else about the emotional appeal of faith that's easy to overlook: the way it allows people to outsource responsibility. If you believe there's a divine plan behind everything, it takes some of the weight off your shoulders. You don't have to wrestle with every tragedy or injustice on your own. You can tell yourself that it's in God's hand. That's comforting, but it can also discourage deeper reflection. If everything happens for a reason, there's less pressure to question why terrible things happen, why suffering exists, why innocent people die. Faith can sometimes act like a psychological shortcut, letting people avoid the hard, uncomfortable work of facing reality's unfairness directly. And when leaders invoke divine authority, it creates another layer of emotional insulation. This isn't just my opinion, this is God's command. That shields them from criticism. If people accept that authority emotionally, they are far less likely to challenge it rationally. Disagreement isn't just disagreement, it becomes rebellion against the divine. That's one reason religion has so often been used to justify actions that, outside of a faith context, would be hard to defend. The emotional appeal of believing you're on the side of ultimate goodness is powerful, even when it leads to cruelty, oppression, or violence. Believers can feel morally righteous because they believe they're following divine will. We see this emotional mechanism across history, in wars, in politics, in cultural battles. The emotional security of faith can make people deeply resistant to new ideas, not because the ideas are untrue, but because they threaten the emotional structure they've built their lives on. This is part of why deconversion, leaving faith, can feel so traumatic. It's not just losing a belief system. It's losing a worldview that made sense of everything, losing the comforting narrative that life has purpose, that death is not the end, that justice will be served, that someone cares unconditionally. When people walk away from faith, They're often accused of being arrogant, of thinking they know better. But more often, it's not arrogance. It's a painful willingness to face uncertainty, to live without easy answers, to accept that some questions may remain unanswered. The emotional appeal of faith endures because it offers what we all crave at some level: meaning, security, belonging, hope, certainty, transcendence. These are not small desires. They go to the core of what it means to be human, but the fact that something feels good doesn't make it true. Emotional needs can shape beliefs, but they don't validate them. The sun doesn't rise tomorrow because we hope it will. It rises because of predictable, observable forces. The same principle applies to beliefs about gods, souls, afterlives, and divine plans. Recognizing the emotional mechanics behind faith doesn't make the experience of believers any less real. Their comfort, their joy, their sense of meaning, those are genuine emotions. But the existence of those emotions isn't evidence that the beliefs behind them are true. And perhaps that's one of the hardest truths to sit with, that we can feel deeply comforted by ideas that may not reflect reality, that sometimes emotional security comes at the cost of intellectual honesty. In the end, the emotional appeal of faith is not a flaw of individual believers. It's a reflection of our shared human nature, our vulnerability to hope, fear, grief, and longing. It speaks to parts of us that crave answers where answers are hard to find. But truth, if we care about it, requires something different. It requires the strength to tolerate uncertainty, to live without guarantees, to resist the comfort of answers that feel good but lack evidence. That path isn't easy, it's rarely comforting, but it offers something else: the chance to see the world as it is, without illusions, without false promises, without stories we tell ourselves to feel safe, that may not offer the same emotional warmth, but it offers a kind of quiet dignity, an honesty with reality, a respect for the truth, however difficult it might be. And in the long run, that may be a deeper kind of peace